The girl everyone rejected became the keeper of the village's greatest secret. The night they poured hot palm oil on Idara's only wrapper and dragged her out of the engagement hall in front of the whole village, nobody knew that in exactly 41 days, that same girl would be the one standing between them and total destruction. Nobody knew that the birthmark they spat on, the one shaped like a coiled snake behind her left ear, was the mark her own grandmother had worn before her and her grandmother's grandmother before that. And nobody, not even the elders who sat comfortably on their carved stools, pretending to know everything about tradition, understood that the greatest secret their village had ever buried was about to crawl out of the earth wearing the face of the girl they had just humiliated. If you love stories that don't let you breathe, stories with layers underneath layers, stay with me till the end, and don't forget to hit that subscribe button before this story pulls you all the way in, because what happens next changes everything you think you understand about Idara, about Ikang village, and about who really deserves to be called worthless. Ikang was a small village tucked between the Kwa River and a stretch of thick forest that the elders called the Silent Bush, because it was said that even the wind refused to make noise when it passed through there. The village lived on fishing, farming, and the salt trade that came through twice a year from the coast. It was a peaceful place on the surface, the kind of place where everybody knew everybody's business, where gossip traveled faster than sickness, and where a girl's worth was measured by how loudly the men praised her beauty and how quickly a suitor's family came knocking. Idara had neither. She was 19 years old, tall, quiet, with skin the color of roasted groundnut and eyes that always looked like they were watching something nobody else could see. Her mother, Ekaite, had died when Idara was 12, leaving her alone in a small mud house at the edge of the village, close to where the forest began. Her father had never been in the picture. The women said he ran away when he saw the birthmark behind her ear. The men said worse things about curses and bad luck, and children born to carry sins that weren't theirs. Idara grew up doing what she could to survive. She fetched water for families who wouldn't let her sit in their compounds. She sold firewood in the market where women haggled her price down because they knew she had no father, no brother, no husband to defend her. She was polite to everyone, greeted every elder with a bent knee, never raised her voice, never fought back, and still the village found ways to remind her every single day that she did not belong. The engagement hall incident happened on a dry Saturday afternoon, the kind of afternoon where the sun sat directly overhead and made everyone's temper short. Asuku, the only son of Chief Utibe, the richest man in Ikang, was being introduced to his new bride, a merchant daughter from the next village called Item. The whole village had gathered under the big Udara tree near the square. Drums were playing and the smell of jollof rice and roasted goat meat filled the air. Idara had not been invited. She came anyway, not to disturb anything, but because Asukwo's mother, before her death 2 years earlier, had been one of the only people in Ikang who ever showed Idara kindness. She wanted to pay her respects at the family compound, nothing more. But Chief Utibe saw her standing quietly at the edge of the crowd, and something in his face changed the moment their eyes met. He didn't just look angry, he looked afraid. And fear, when it wears the mask of anger, is the most dangerous thing a powerful man can feel. Who let this one in? He barked, loud enough for the drums to stop. Idara tried to explain, tried to say she only came to greet the family, but Chief Utibe was already storming towards her, his agbada sweeping dust behind him. He grabbed a calabash of hot palm oil that had been set aside for the cooking, and before anyone could stop him, he poured it over her wrapper, the only good cloth she owned, the one her mother had woven for her before she died. "You useless girl," he spat. "Cursed girl, you think you can just walk into my son's engagement and bring your bad luck with you? Get out before I let the boys drag you into the bush myself." The crowd laughed. Some of them laughed nervously, the kind of laughter people give when they're scared to be on the wrong side of a powerful man. Others laughed freely, cruelly, the way people laugh when they've decided a person's pain doesn't matter. Asuku, the groom-to-be, said nothing. He simply looked away, ashamed but not brave enough to defend her. That silence hurt Idara more than the burning oil on her skin. She ran. She ran past the square, past the market stalls, past the old well, until she reached her house at the edge of the village where the forest breathed its cold air on her burning skin. She sat on the floor of her hut and cried until her chest hurt. And in the darkness of that small room, she heard something she had never noticed before. A voice, faint, coming from beneath the floor, or maybe from the walls, or maybe from somewhere inside her own head. It said only one word: soon. She thought grief was playing tricks on her mind. She wiped her tears, told herself it was nothing, and fell asleep on the bare floor with her burnt wrapper still clinging to her skin. But that voice was not grief. That voice was the beginning of everything. 3 days later, an old woman named Mma Afiong came to Idara's house before sunrise. Mma Afiong was the oldest woman in Ikang, older than anyone could remember, with cloudy eyes that some said had gone completely blind, though she moved through the village like she could see clearer than anyone with 2 working eyes. She was feared more than respected, because she rarely spoke to anyone, and when she did speak, her words had a way of coming true. "Show be your ear," Mma Afiong said, without even a greeting.
Idara, confused and still nursing the burn on her arm, hesitated before pulling back her hair to reveal the birthmark behind her left ear, the coiled snake shape that had brought her nothing but shame her whole life. Mma Afiong's cloudy eyes widened, just slightly. She reached out a trembling hand and touched the mark, and Idara felt a strange warmth spread through her body, like standing too close to a fire. "Your grandmother had this same mark," Mma Afiong said quietly. "Nobody remembers her because they made sure nobody would. Your mother hid you well, child. She hid you so well that even I did not know until this morning when the river spoke your name to me in my sleep." Idara didn't understand a single word of it, but something in her chest told her not to laugh it off, not to dismiss it the way everyone always dismissed things about her. "What are you talking about, Mma Afiong? What mark? What grandmother?" Mma Afiong looked around, as if checking that the walls themselves weren't listening, and then she sat down slowly on the mat beside Idara. "There are things this village buried a long time ago, deeper than any grave, things that only one bloodline was ever meant to guard. I will not tell you everything today, because some truths, when given too fast, can break a person instead of building them. But I will tell you this. You are not cursed, my daughter. You have never been cursed. You are something this village forgot to recognize, because recognizing you would mean admitting what certain powerful men did to keep their power." Before Idara could ask more, Mma Afiong stood up, steadying herself on her walking stick, and left as quietly as she had come, leaving Idara alone with more questions than she had ever carried in her whole life. For the next 2 weeks, Idara tried to go on with her ordinary life, fetching water, selling firewood, absorbing the sideways glances and whispered insults, but something inside her had shifted. She began to notice things she had never paid attention to before. The old shrine near the river that nobody visited anymore, overgrown with weeds, yet somehow the weeds never touched the stone altar in its center. The way Mma Afiong's hut sat exactly at the boundary between the village and the silent bush, as if placed there on purpose, as a guard post. The way certain elders went quiet whenever her mother's name was mentioned, quickly changing the subject like they were avoiding a wound that had never fully healed. And then there was Nyong. Nyong was the village blacksmith, a broad-shouldered young man, a few years older than Idara, with calloused hands and a face that rarely smiled, but eyes that were always gentle when they landed on her. He was not from a wealthy family, and he had no interest in village politics or gossip. He simply worked day after day, shaping iron into hoes, machetes, and cooking pots. And every single time Idara passed his workshop, he would set aside a little extra without ever asking for payment. A small nail here, a repaired pot there. Small kindnesses that meant everything to a girl who received almost none. "You don't have to keep giving me things for free," Idara told him one evening as she watched sparks fly from his hammer against hot iron. Nyong didn't look up from his work.
I'm not giving you charity. I'm giving you what's fair. You've been carrying more of your share of this village's cruelty for years. The least I can do is make sure your pot don't leak." It was such a simple thing to say, but Idara held on to it the way a drowning person holds on to driftwood. In a village that had decided she was worth nothing, Nyong's small, steady kindness was the only thing that made her feel like a human being. Before we continue, if this story is already pulling you in, do me a favor and tap that subscribe button right now, because trust me, what's coming next is going to shock you, and you don't want to miss the twist that's about to change how you see every single character in this story. The trouble started properly when the rains refused to come. Ikang depended on its rainy season the way a body depends on breath. The farms needed rain for the yam and cassava to grow, the river needed rain to stay full enough for fishing, and the wells needed rain to stay from running dry. But that year, the rains came late, and when they finally arrived, they were thin, weak showers that soaked the topsoil and disappeared before they could reach the roots of anything. By the third month of the dry spell, panic had settled over Ikang like smoke. The main well in the village center had dropped so low that women had to line up before dawn just to scoop out muddy water. Farmers watched their crops wither in rows, children cried from hunger in the evenings, and in times like these, when a community is desperate and afraid, they always look for someone to blame. The children were the ones who felt it first. Idara watched them from a distance, watched their rabes press a little closer against their skin each week, watched mothers stretch one wrap of cassava into 2 meals, then 3, then nothing by the end of the day. She had grown up hungry herself, and there was a particular ache in watching other people's children go through the same thing, knowing exactly what that hunger did to a young mind, how it made a child quiet in a way that had nothing to do with good behavior. She began to leave small bundles of firewood outside the doors of the poorest families at night, never staying long enough to be thanked, never wanting anyone to trace the kindness back to her, because she already knew how quickly kindness from her could be twisted into something suspicious. It didn't take long before fingers pointed at Idara. It started after that girl walked into the engagement, one woman whispered at the well. "Everyone knows her blood carries something unnatural," another added at the well. "Chief Utibe was right to chase her out. We should have chased her out of the whole village long ago."
That mark behind her ear. My grandmother used to say marks like that belong to witches who serve the river spirits against their own people. The whispers grew louder each day, feeding on fear the way fire feeds on dry grass. Idara noticed the way people avoided her stall in the market now, the way children were pulled away from her path, the way even some of the women who used to at least tolerate her now crossed to the other side of the road when they saw her coming. She kept her head down and kept walking, telling herself that gossip, no matter how ugly, could not actually hurt her, not the way the drought was hurting everyone. She was wrong. One night, while sitting outside her hut trying to catch whatever breeze existed in the thick heat, she noticed a group of men moving quietly near the edge of the forest, carrying torches and shovels. She recognized 2 of Chief Utibe's personal guards among them, along with a man she didn't know, someone who spoke with a strange accent she couldn't place. They weren't hunting, they weren't farming, they were digging, carefully, methodically, in a specific spot near the old shrine by the river, the same shrine that nobody in Ikang ever visited. Idara stayed hidden behind a cluster of palm trees, watching, her heart pounding in her chest. She couldn't hear everything they said, but she caught fragments carried on the wind. "Has to be somewhere close. The old woman's diary said it was buried near the stone. If the girl finds it before we do, everything Utibe's father built falls apart. Just dig faster, we don't have all night." She didn't understand what they were looking for, but she understood enough to know that Chief Utibe was hiding something connected to the shrine, something connected to a diary, something connected to her. She slipped away before they could spot her, running through the dark towards Mma Afiong's hut, her bare feet slapping against dry earth, her mind spinning with questions that suddenly felt far more dangerous than gossip about a birthmark. Mma Afiong was awake when Idara arrived, sitting by a small fire as if she had been expecting her. "They are digging by the shrine," Idara said, breathless. "Utibe's men. They mentioned a diary. They mentioned my grandmother. Ma, please, I need you to tell me the truth now. All of it." Mma Afiong was quiet for a long moment, staring into the fire. And when she finally spoke, her voice carried a weight Idara had never heard from her before. "Sit down, child. It is time." And that is when the story of Ikang village cracked open, and everything Idara thought she knew about herself, her family, and the people who had spent her whole life mocking her changed forever. 50 years ago, before Chief Utibe was ever chief, before his father Okoye even dreamed of holding power in Ikang, the village had a different kind of leadership. Alongside the male chief, there was always a woman known as the keeper, a role passed down through one specific bloodline, chosen not by wealth or beauty, but by a mark, the same coiled snake mark that sat behind Idara's ear. The keeper's role was sacred and simple. She alone knew the location of Ikang's hidden reserve, a communal store of gold dust, ivory, and rare goods collected over generations from the salt trade, hidden deep within a cave system connected to the shrine by the river. This reserve was not for any one family. It belonged to the whole village, meant to be used only in times of true crisis, famine, war, or disaster, protected fiercely so that no single powerful man could ever hoard it for himself. Idara's great-grandmother had been keeper. Then her grandmother, a woman named Adayaha, inherited the mark and the role after her. But Okoye, Chief Utibe's father, was not a patient man. He tried for years to convince Adayaha to reveal the location, promising to use it wisely, promising development, promising progress. Adayaha refused every single time because she understood something Okoye never wanted to accept. Power given to one man's hands, no matter how good his intentions sound, eventually becomes power abused. So Okoye did something unforgivable. He spread rumors that Adayaha was cursed, that her bloodline brought misfortune, that the drought hitting the village that particular year, decades ago, was her fault. He turned the village against her, the same way his son would turn the village against her granddaughter, using fear as his weapon, because fear works faster than truth. Adayaha was driven out of Ikang in disgrace, her position as keeper erased from memory, her name forbidden to be spoken. She fled with her young daughter Ekaite, who would grow up far from Ikang, married a stranger, had her own daughter named Idara, and eventually, drawn by something she could never fully explain, returned quietly to the village of her mother's shame, hoping to disappear into an ordinary life and protect her child from a legacy too dangerous to carry. She almost succeeded. Almost. "Your mother knew," Mma Afiong said. "She knew exactly what she was protecting you from. That's why she never told you, why she kept to herself, why she never let you get close to the shrine or ask questions about your family. She hoped that if nobody remembered the keeper's bloodline, you would be safe from men like Okoye and now his son Utibe. But blood has a way of speaking louder than silence, my daughter. And it seems the drought this year has forced the truth to the surface, just as it forced it to the surface 50 years ago."
Idara sat frozen, tears sliding silently down her face, not from sadness this time, but from the overwhelming weight of finally understanding. Every rejection, every insult, every burnt piece of cloth, and every cruel whisper suddenly made a horrible kind of sense. She had never been cursed. She had been feared by a family desperate to protect a theft that had lasted 2 generations. "Chief Utibe knows," Idara whispered. "He knows I'm the keeper's granddaughter. That's why he humiliated me at the engagement. That's why his men are digging right now. He's not looking for a diary to understand history. He's looking for the location of the reserve before I can find it myself and expose everything his father did, everything he's continued to do." "Yes," Mma Afiong said simply, "and if you don't reach that shrine before him, child, this village will lose more than its greatest secret. It will lose its last chance at survival, because that drought outside is not slowing down and the wells are not going to fill themselves.
Only the reserve holds what's left of the emergency grain stores your ancestors set aside for exactly this kind of crisis. Utibe has hidden that fact from everyone. He would rather let this village starve slowly than let anyone discover that his family has been sitting on the solution the entire time, out of pride and greed. The weight of what Mma Afiong was saying settled over Idara like a heavy cloak. This was no longer just about clearing her family's name. It was about a village full of hungry children, cracked farmland, and desperate mothers, all suffering unnecessarily because 2 generations of one greedy family refused to let go of a secret that was never truly theirs to keep. If you've made it this far, you already know this story is far from over. And honestly, if you're not subscribed yet, now is the perfect time, because everything you thought you understood about who the real villain is in this story is about to be tested in ways you won't see coming. Idara didn't sleep that night. She sat with Mma Afiong until the fire burned down to embers, learning everything the old woman could tell her about the shrine, about the hidden passage said to lie beneath the largest stone at its center, about the specific pattern of Nsibidi symbols her grandmother Adiaha used to trace with her fingers as a child, memorized as a kind of key. Mma Afiong could not tell her everything, because even she had only fragments passed down through careful, secretive conversations over the decades. But she told her enough. At dawn, Idara made a decision that surprised even herself. Instead of running straight to the shrine to search alone, she went to Nyong's workshop. He was already awake, stoking his forge, and the moment he saw her face, he set down his tools completely. What happened? She told him everything, faster than she meant to, the words tumbling out of her in a rush, the birthmark, the keeper's bloodline, Okoye's betrayal 50 years ago, Utibe's men digging by the shrine, the hidden reserve that could save the entire village from starvation. She expected him to look at her with doubt, maybe even fear, the way everyone else in Ikang always looked at anything connected to her. Instead, Nyong's jaw tightened and something fierce settled into his expression. Then we go now, before they find it first. We? Idara asked. You didn't think I was going to let you walk into danger alone, did you? His voice was steady, certain, the same steady certainty he brought to every piece of iron he ever shaped. I've watched this village treat you like dirt for years, Idara, and I never had the power to stop it. But I have hands, and I have a blade I forged myself. And if Utibe's men think they're going to hurt you again, they will have to go through me first. There was no time to fully process the warmth that spread through her chest at his words. They moved quickly, slipping out of the village before the morning crowds gathered, taking the narrow path through the edge of the silent bush that led towards the river shrine, moving carefully to avoid being seen. But Utibe's men were already digging for days, and when Idara and Nyong reached the shrine, their hearts sank. The ground around the central stone had been torn apart, deep trenches carved into the earth, roots exposed, the ancient Nsibidi carvings on the smaller surrounding stones scratched and damaged by careless shovels. It looked less like a search and more like a violation. They haven't found the entrance yet, Nyong said, examining the mess. If they had, they wouldn't still be digging. Idara knelt beside the largest central stone, running her fingers over its surface like Mma Afiong had described, searching for the specific pattern of symbols. Her hands were shaking, not from fear now, but from a strange electric certainty building in her chest, as if her body remembered something her mind had never been taught. And then her fingers found it. A carved symbol shaped like 2 intersecting circles, cool and smooth, under a layer of dried mud that Utibe's men had somehow missed entirely because it was hidden beneath a natural crack in the rock that made it look accidental rather than deliberate. She pressed her palm flat against it, and the warmth she had felt from Mma Afiong's touch weeks earlier returned, spreading up her arm, and with a low, grinding sound that made both of them jump back, the stone shifted, revealing a narrow opening beneath it, dark and cool, leading downward into the earth. "How did you know that would work?" Nyong asked, staring at her with something between awe and disbelief. "I didn't," Idara admitted. "I just knew where to touch it, like my hands remembered something my head never learned." They didn't have time to marvel at it further. Voices drifted through the trees, growing closer. Chief Utibe's men were returning.
"Go," Nyong urged, pushing her toward the opening. "I'll hold them off as long as I can." "Absolutely not," Idara snapped, grabbing his wrist. "You're not staying here alone to face armed men while I hide underground. We go together or we don't go at all." There was no time to argue. They dropped into the opening just as the first torches appeared through the trees, pulling the stone slab mostly closed behind them, leaving only a thin crack for air and dim light. Above them, they heard Utibe's men arrive at the shrine, cursing at the state of their unfinished excavation, unaware that the two people they were searching for were now standing directly beneath their feet. The passage beneath the shrine was narrow at first, forcing them to crouch, the air thick with the smell of damp earth and something else, something sweet and mineral, like the smell that clings to old coins. As they moved deeper, the passage widened into a small cave, and there, in the dim light filtering through cracks above, Idara saw it. Clay pots, dozens of them, sealed with wax and stacked carefully along the cave walls. Bundles of what looked like preserved grain, wrapped tightly in oiled cloth to survive years underground. Small woven baskets containing gold dust and raw ivory carvings, untouched exactly as they had been left. And in the center of it all, resting on a stone pedestal, a leather-bound diary, cracked with age but remarkably preserved, with her grandmother Adiaha's name carved into its cover. Idara's hands trembled as she picked it up, flipping through pages filled with careful handwriting, recording not just the location and contents of the reserve, but everything, every detail of Okoye's attempt to bribe her, threaten her, and eventually destroy her reputation when she refused to hand over control. The final entries were the most heartbreaking, written in the days before she was forced to flee, describing her fear not for herself, but for the daughter and future granddaughter she prayed would one day be safe enough to reclaim what was rightfully hers and what was rightfully the village's. "This is proof," Idara whispered, her voice shaking. "This is proof of everything, not just the reserve, but what Okoye did, what Utibe has continued doing. If we bring this back to the village, if we show the elders, they'll have no choice but to believe us." "They'll have no choice," Nyong agreed grimly, "unless Utibe finds a way to silence us before we get the chance to speak." That fear was not unfounded. As they carefully gathered what they could carry, the diary secured against Idara's chest and a small couch of gold dust safely with them as proof, distant shouting reached them from above. The men outside had noticed the shifted stone, the narrow gap that shouldn't have existed. They had found the entrance. "We need another way out," Nyong said urgently, scanning the cave walls. Idara remembered a detail from the diary's final pages, a mention of a second passage, one Adiaha had carved herself as an escape route in case the shrine entrance was ever compromised, leading not back toward the village, but toward the riverbank further downstream. They found it hidden behind a stack of the oldest clay pots, a tight crawl space, barely large enough for one person at a time. They squeezed through just as they heard the main stone slab being forced open above them, torchlight spilling into the cave they had just left. Crawling through the narrow tunnel felt endless, the sound of their own breathing loud in their ears, dirt scraping against their skin, until finally, blessedly, they emerged into daylight at the riverbank, gasping for air, filthy but alive, the diary and a small pouch of gold dust secured safely with them as proof. Now here's where things take a turn you probably didn't expect. And if you're still watching, if this story has your full attention, subscribing right now means you won't miss what happens when Idara walks back into that village, because Chief Utibe is about to make a mistake that exposes everything, and it happens in front of the entire village in broad daylight with no way for him to hide. They didn't go straight home. Instead, Idara insisted they go to Mma Afiong first, needing guidance on how to present what they had found without giving Utibe a chance to twist the narrative before the truth could settle in the village's mind. Mma Afiong listened to everything with a grave expression, examining the diary carefully, nodding slowly as she confirmed details that matched fragments she remembered from her own youth, back when Adiaha was still respected as keeper. "You cannot simply announce this in the market," Mma Afiong said. "Utibe will call you a liar, a thief who stole from the shrine, and with his wealth and influence, half the village might believe him before they believe you. You need the elders present, all of them, in the open, where Utibe cannot control the room the way he controls the market gossip." They decided to call for a village gathering the following morning, using the drought crisis itself as justification, claiming Mma Afiong had received a vision about ending the water shortage. It wasn't entirely a lie. Word spread quickly in Ikang, as it always did, and by the next morning, nearly the entire village had gathered beneath the same Udara tree where Idara had been humiliated weeks earlier. Chief Utibe arrived flanked by his guards, visibly irritated at being summoned rather than doing the summoning himself, his son Asokwo trailing behind him, looking uncomfortable, as though he sensed something was wrong but couldn't name it. Idara stood at the front of the gathering with Nyong beside her and Mma Afiong steady on her walking stick, the diary held firmly in Idara's hands, the small pouch of gold dust visible for all to see. "What is the meaning of this?" Utibe demanded, his eyes narrowing the moment he spotted the diary, recognition flashing across his face before he could hide it. A flicker so brief, most of the crowd missed it entirely. But Idara saw it, and so did the elder sitting closest to the front.
"My name is Idara," she began, her voice trembling slightly, but growing steadier with each word. "Some of you know me as the girl with the caste mark, the girl nobody wanted at their engagement, the girl blamed for this drought. But what none of you knew, what was hidden from you deliberately, is that I am the granddaughter of Adiaha, the last true keeper of Ikang's hidden reserve, the reserve that our ancestors built specifically for times like this one, times of famine and desperation." Murmurs rippled through the crowd, confusion mixing with disbelief. Utibe stepped forward, his voice booming with practiced authority. "Lies! This girl is clearly trying to manipulate all of you with some foolish story to gain sympathy after her disgrace at my son's engagement. There is no keeper, there is no reserve. This is nothing but the desperate fantasy of a cursed girl." "Then explain this," Idara said, holding up the diary for the crowd to see, opening it to a page that detailed exact dates, exact conversations, exact bribes offered by a man named Okoi to a woman named Adiaha decades ago. "My grandmother's own handwriting, describing how your father tried for years to force her into revealing the location of a reserve that belongs to this entire village, not to one family. And when she refused, he did exactly what you did to me. He spread rumors, he called her cursed, he turned this village against her until she had no choice but to flee with her daughter, my mother, to protect her from further harm." The murmurs grew louder, sharper, uncertain glances passing between neighbors. Mma Afiong stepped forward then, her cloudy eyes fixed directly at Utibe despite her blindness, as though she could see straight through him. "I remember Adiaha," she said, her voice carrying easily across the silent gathering. "I remember the day she disappeared, and I remember the lies your father spread about her in the weeks before, lies I was too young and too afraid to question at the time. I have carried that shame for 50 years, watching this village punish an innocent family for a crime committed by your own bloodline. It is time this village finally hears the truth."
Utibe's face had gone pale, his composure cracking at the edges, but he made one last attempt. Even if any of this were true, which it is not, where is this supposed reserve? Show us proof beyond a diary any clever girl could have forged. This was the moment. Idara reached into the small pouch and poured a portion of the gold dust into her open palm, letting the crowd see it glinting in the sunlight alongside carefully wrapped samples of the preserved grain they had carried out from the cave. There is enough grain hidden beneath the old shrine to feed this entire village through the worst of this drought. Enough gold to rebuild what the dry season has destroyed. It has been sitting there for 50 years, protected and untouched, while children in this village go hungry because Chief Utibe would rather let his neighbors starve than admit his family stole what was never theirs to control. The silence that followed was thick as to touch. Idara could see it settling over the crowd, that particular kind of silence that comes right before people stop pretending they didn't already suspect the truth. Somewhere behind her, a woman began to weep quietly, the sound small and broken against the heavy stillness of the gathering. And then, from somewhere in the crowd, an old farmer named Ita stepped forward, his face twisted with rage and anger. My son died last dry season. He died of hunger fever because we had nothing left to feed him. And this whole time there was grain sitting on the ground because of your family's greed? The crowd's mood shifted instantly, anger rippling outward like fire catching dry grass. Voices rose, accusations flew, and Utibe, cornered and desperate, made his final and fatal mistake. He grabbed one of his guards' machetes and launched towards Idara, screaming that she was a liar who deserved to be silenced permanently, the same way his father silenced her grandmother decades before. Nyong moved faster than anyone expected, stepping directly into Utibe's path, catching the older man's wrist with a grip forged from years of hammering iron, twisting the machete free with a practiced motion that left Utibe stumbling backward, disarmed and humiliated in front of the entire village he had spent his life trying to control. That attempted attack, witnessed by every single person present, erased whatever doubt remained. A man who had nothing to hide would not try to silence a girl with a blade in front of his entire community. The elders, shaken from their previous complicity, finally stood and demanded Utibe be restrained. Even Asukbo, watching his father's true nature exposed so violently, so publicly, stepped back from him in horror, years of quiet unease finally crystallizing into something he could no longer ignore or excuse. The days that followed moved quickly. Under the elders' authority and with Mma Afiong's guidance, the village retrieved the full contents of the hidden reserve, distributing grain fairly to every family, prioritizing those hit hardest by the drought, including old Ita's remaining children. Utibe was stripped of his chieftaincy, tried before the full council for the theft and deception spanning 2 generations, and exiled from Ikang, forbidden from ever returning, his wealth seized to compensate the families his greed had harmed. Asupo, to the surprise of many, chose to stay and rebuild what was left of his family's shattered reputation through honest work, publicly apologizing to Idara for his silence at the engagement, for every year he had watched his father torment her without ever raising a single word in her defense. It didn't erase the past, but it was at least a beginning of accountability that Ikang had rarely seen before. And Idara, the girl everyone had rejected, the girl blamed for droughts and misfortune, the girl who once sat crying alone in a burnt wrapper on a bare mud floor, was formally recognized by the village elders as the rightful keeper, her grandmother's name finally spoken aloud again, without shame, restored to its proper place in Ikang's history.
Now, if you stayed with me this far, you already know this story wasn't just about hidden gold or buried grain. Before we get to how it truly ends, I need you to do one thing for me. Subscribe. Not just for this story, but because stories like this one, stories about people who are underestimated, mistreated, and dismissed, only to rise and reveal a truth nobody expected, deserved to be heard by more people. And your subscription helps make sure the next story, like this one, reaches someone who needs it. Months passed, and slowly, Ikang began to heal. The rains eventually returned, not through magic, but through the natural rhythm of seasons that had simply been delayed, though many in the village quietly believed Idara's honesty had somehow lifted a weight the community had carried without realizing. The wells filled again, the farms grew green, and the shrine by the river, once neglected and overgrown, was restored properly, tended now with real respect rather than superstitious avoidance. Idara took her role as keeper seriously, but not in the secretive, isolated way her ancestors had been forced to practice it. She walked alongside the elders openly, ensuring the remaining reserve was managed transparently, documented carefully, protected not through secrecy alone, but through the accountability of an entire community that had learned painfully what happens when power is hidden from those it's meant to serve. Nyong remained by her side through all of it, not as a hero seeking reward, but as the same steady, quiet presence he had always been. And slowly, what had started as small kindnesses at his workshop grew into something neither of them had expected, but both had quietly hoped for. When he eventually asked Mma Afiong's blessing to formally court Idara, the old woman simply smiled, the first genuine smile Idara had ever seen on her face. "Your grandmother would be proud," Mma Afiong told her one evening, sitting together by the restored shrine as the sun set over the Kwa River. "Not because you found gold hidden underground, my daughter, but because you found the courage to stand in front of people who despised you and speak the truth anyway. That courage is worth more than every pot of gold dust buried beneath that stone." Idara looked out over the river, thinking about the girl she had been just months earlier, crying alone in a burnt wrapper, believing every cruel word the village had ever thrown at her. She thought about the birthmark she had spent her whole life hiding beneath her hair, and how that same mark had ultimately saved the very people who once used it to shame her. Sometimes, the things people mock us for, the things that make us feel like outsiders, like burdens, like curses, are actually the exact things that make us capable of saving what everyone else was too afraid, too greedy, or too blind to protect. Idara didn't need the village's approval to know her own worth anymore. But watching that same village finally see her clearly, finally understand what her family had sacrificed to protect them, gave her a peace she never thought she would feel. If this story touched you, if watching Idara rise from rejection to becoming the very thing that saved her village moved something in you, then let me know. Because stories like hers deserve to be remembered, shared, and passed down just like the secrets she carried. Subscribe, stay close, because the next story is already waiting. And trust me, it's going to pull you in just as deep as this one did.